The project here at the Wesley Playhouse really started 5 years ago when the church was in the throes of having to close because the membership had gone down to around 6 or 7 members who were all elderly in their 70s and were really wondering where the future was for them as a church. I came to them with the idea of perhaps making the church into a play centre, a bit like a wacky warehouse, in the hope that young people and families from the surrounding area would be able to come and enjoy somewhere where Christianity was lived out, a place where people could share their faith. There were people who thought, well, where's the money going to come from? Because at the time we only had about £3,000 in the bank. How was it really church? People in the past had done play groups, they'd done mums and tots groups, we'd run holiday clubs, and nothing really had worked. And in the year 2000 we'd gone out and asked the local community what they actually wanted here, and a lot of people said somewhere safe that they could come with their families. Biffa came and said they'd give us the full funding of £50,000, which for a project like we were trying to do, purely church, purely outreach, for them as a secular granting agent, it was really an answer to prayer.
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name.
The congregation based here were, when I started the work, 70 and 80 years old. There's 7 of them. They've always had a heart for the people of this community. Each member comes to the Playhouse different days of the week. They blow balloons up, they make party bags, they make the sandwiches on the Saturdays for the parties, and they have a real involvement here. And in fact, near enough every member would say to you now, if only you'd done this 10 years ago when we were younger, we'd like to spend more and more time here, because we can see how our building has come to life, how the faith here has grown.
I've been praying for the guidance for this church for years now. I have felt from the word go that God's been with us all the way. We've had a lot of obstacles to overcome. Most of us couldn't see what Caroline could see. We were daunted, I think, all the way until the day of the very opening. And we haven't been daunted since.
And 3 years to the day almost since we opened, we've had 42,000 people through the door. On Good Friday we had over 100 people here celebrating Good Friday and all that it means to be a Christian. 100 people coming to find out about the story of Easter. 8 different families have asked to have their children baptised in the Playhouse because that's where they've come with their children, and they recognise this is a church, they recognise this is church for them.
Thank you, Lord.
On the second Sunday of the month we have a family worship where families are encouraged to come together to do something similar to Messy Church, where they come and they do crafts and they sing together, and we're actually seeing now between 40 and 100 people come once a month to that event, and finding it a real blessing to them. There is a purpose for every church to be their faith-sharing community, and if we're not sharing our faiths, then why are we here? And perhaps our buildings will be the legacy of the lack of faith that some people have in actually stepping forward and looking to where people need the church, not the other way around. I would say if anyone's thinking of starting something new, the biggest step is to first let go. Let go of the past, let go of all the things that have happened before, and actually look forward to what God wants to do through you. So my view is, you don't have to be a vicar, you don't have to be a minister, you just have to be a Christian that's willing to follow where Jesus leads.
What an inspiring video, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's like one of my favorite crush expressions of all times. So what did you hear from the video that inspired you or made you think differently or any of those things. Yeah.
That a church is never too small and its members are never too old for the Holy Spirit to move.
It's never too small or too old for the Holy Spirit to move, right? There was only 6 or 7 folks. They were all over 7, right? And it's amazing that they didn't simply say, okay, the rest of it could be, a jungle gym, but we still want one little room to be ours, where we worship, right? But they're in there making sandwiches, and they're having worship in the big space, right? It's incredible. Yeah.
Let go.
Let's go. What else? Yeah.
The older lady said that we couldn't see it, we didn't think it could happen, and even as the pastor, I guess, was moving forward and doing it, they kept saying, how is this going to work? But it moved forward anyway.
Right.
And I wonder how that happened. I wonder how the resistance was overcome, besides the Holy Spirit.
Maybe that's
How did that actually happen? Besides the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, the more and more kind of I do this work at my own church and others, it's moments that I could not have imagined that have helped people let go. That you could only say, only the Holy Spirit could do this. I don't know what just happened in here. Yeah.
One of the things I've seen in our churches as we talk about this, people pipe up and say, oh yeah, I was thinking about, it's like the Holy Spirit is touching here and there, and once we start to talk about it, people realize that it's crossed their mind too.
Yeah, completely. That happens, definitely that happens quite a bit. And no one wants to say it, right?
Because it's impossible.
It's
It's impossible. We could never do that.
Right. And I think you're very right about, Caroline, who had this kind of prophetic vision, right? And not everyone saw it. And that's okay, because not everyone's a prophet, right? And so I think that kind of reminds us that we have to keep going, right? Not everyone will see what it looks like. And that's okay, and that doesn't mean they're bad. It probably doesn't even mean that they resist it, right? But they just can't see. So they might ask a lot of questions. They might be a little nervous. But as the leader, we're called to not really kind of give into that nervous anxiety, right? But to continue moving forward. Yeah. What else?
I also saw that they did not give up what appeared to be their preferred way to worship. There were at least 2 scenes where in that small appeared to be a chapel, the pastor and the people were singing and they were doing the Lord's Prayer. So I assumed that would be what they had always known.
Right.
So there still was place and an opportunity for them to worship in a way that had always been meaningful to them. Maybe not in the space they had always used, but it was still created for them, even though something else was going on.
Right. So they didn't blow up the old dock.
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I think it's important too. It's and not or. So
Right.
Yes.
if we want to reach, stay relevant, stay current, whatever term we're using, then if we're equipping people to be in ministry, we have to allow them to be in ministry in their way, and in their context, and according to their calling, not according to our building or our property or our framework, paradigm, whatever. So the cool thing about this whole thing is so many more people can do so many more things once we take the parameters off of how we define church and how we do that. So it is neat to see that it's an and thing. It's not like, hey, somebody wants organ, God bless you. Man, we're going to pound out the organ. Everybody else, there's radio stations now play only organ music, but we're supposed to value that for an hour on Sunday. So, it's just looking at just the way we live and applying, let's catch up type of stuff.
What else? Anyone else? Yeah.
It looked like that they really kind of put a big investment in, from what I could tell, and yet they didn't expect to get so much back. And each one of those individuals was 6 or 7. They looked like they were just enriched beyond that investment. So it was
Great
in
thing
and
to
out.
point out. that we didn't really hear a whole lot, what can we get from this, right? Okay, I can be buried in my church because I'm letting them have a playground, right? I can have my funeral in the church because that's really what I want, right? And I've heard that a lot, you know? As long as I have my funeral there, I'm okay, right? But there was none of that. It wasn't like, okay, because the kids are there, I can keep my beautiful building, right? It was really all about the mission. Definitely, and you know, it was this grant that they got, which was like a secular grant, and they said to do purely mission, you know, they applied as a church, not as a cover, not as like, you know, the ark. They applied as a church for this grant, and they got it. And so this is an interesting thing that happens. It's kind of like where a church's dream and a community's need meet. Really is where a fresh expression can be birthed, right? And this church, I mean, really just the pastor of the church had this dream, right? And then when they went out and they listened to the community, it was also what? The community's need. And maybe that's because the pastor's dream was actually influenced by her listening to the community, right? But yeah, anybody else? Hear anything else in the video that was inspiring, helpful, etc.? Very cool. So now we are on the win. When do fresh expressions meet? And so there are fresh expressions that meet all sorts of times, right? I can give you examples of some. One of the guys we went to seminary with that started Dinner Church up in Michigan, right? Michigan. And so when he started, you know, a dinner church there, he talked with one of the local diner owners, and really Monday nights are a low night for a restaurant, if anyone's ever worked in the restaurant business. And so that's the night that he said, listen, I'll promise you that we will have at least the first night 20 meals bought if we can use this space for free. Well, that's great for a diner owner. They're just usually closed, a little bit more money, possibly partnering in this mission, and that's where it happened. It happened Monday night because it kind of worked out financially with the owner to do that, and then, you know, grew. Now they have church in a diner, church in a bar, all of these things. So part of when it would meet was influenced a little bit through the community, right? Most people today on Sunday mornings, and we've talked about, have sports. Another phenomenon since the 70s is, guess what? People work on Sunday mornings, right? People work. And so kind of the win of a fresh expression is really important to think about if we want to reach new people. And then we also have, so there's, the next one is we're looking at kind of the specifics of these, but where do fresh expressions? I mean, really could be anywhere, right? A river, a bar, playground, a park. It's all open. But really the key to the 5 W's is found in doing the work. The how, really doing the work, is where we find the who, what, when, where. Okay, the how, 6 steps of a fresh expression. So we'll go through these, but there's actually another great video that goes through each of these principles, and then we'll talk about them together. But really, as we think about starting a fresh expression, this is really a 6-step process that we ask people to go through. So again, there might be a woman that comes to me and says, we are a fresh expression. And they've listened and they're loving and serving. So I'll say, you know, it sounds like you are the beginning of a fresh expression. You're listening and you're loving and serving. Let's talk about how you might build community with the people that you're loving and serving. So we do a great food pantry, Pastor. You know, this is a fresh expression. Do you know 5 people's names that come to the food pantry? No. We're on the way to be a fresh expression. You are right. Let's think about how we can build community with the folks that are coming to the food pantry. After we build community, are there ways that we could explore discipleship? Maybe people come to the food pantry and then we have something right after that they can come to. Whatever it may be, right? So, let's watch this other video which explains kind of through the story how this works. And I will say that, the guy in this story, he was sent by the church, I think, to work part-time in a new area. So it's called the Titanic Quarter. And so some of you might have heard of that before in Northern Ireland. And so what's interesting is some of us might think, this was kind of his job, right? So he was, as we think about church planters, there aren't many folks that are doing kind of parachute drop churches anymore, right? And the Titanic Quarter was a bubbling, new, growing area, so it would have possibly been perfect for a parachute drop church. But part of what they realized is that even in new bursting areas where you have in 1 year 60,000 people moving to it, in 1 year a parachute drop church where you kind of just plant a church and you say, we're having worship service, we have a great band, we have a great word, people still aren't coming. Right? And so the method that they've used for their planters is this fresh expressions process. So you'll see it here, and I think it really goes through this. Now, if you're a layperson and this is something you're dreaming about kind of on the side, and you only have 5 hours a week to give to this, or 2 hours a week, I think this process is still something, the way that you would go about starting a fresh expression. Or if you're a full-time pastor of a church and want to start with a member, or if you're coaching a member through all of this, it's very helpful.
The dock project began back in 2009, and at that stage everything around here was still a building site. It was still scaffolding and big holes in the ground, but at that stage I was asked by Bishop Harold. I'm an ordained Church of Ireland minister, and I had been kind of looking for my next challenge, and Harold suggested that the challenge might be trying to dream up and think up what might be an appropriate expression of church in the midst of the Titanic Quarter as it grew. We knew even back at that stage that it was going to be massive. Probably couldn't have guessed quite how massive it would become even within a couple of years, but there are projections for thousands of people to live down here, thousands of jobs being created down here, millions of tourists will be here in coming years to see all the Titanic attractions. The student population is massive with the new college that's come down here, so knowing that this was all on its way, even though all you could see was the scaffolding at that stage, the bishop commissioned me to be the chaplain to the area, chaplain to the Titanic Quarter, and start thinking about what it might look like to grow church down here. For the first year as chaplain to the Titanic Quarter, you could quite easily have asked what on earth I was doing with my time. There was nothing to show for it in some ways. It was a year very much of dreaming and talking, and we called it coffee storming. I would just invite anybody, and I mean anybody, who had a vision or a plan or hope for this new part of Belfast to meet me for a cup of coffee, and we just kept asking the question, what could the church do or be down here? Somebody said to me in one of those meetings, and I've never forgotten the phrase, they said, this is the best blank page that the church has had in Ireland since St Patrick stepped off the boat. It's a chance to dream from the ground up and to not have to worry about the different buildings or denominations or traditions that might already be in place. And that was a colossally exciting process, and that went on maybe for a good year or so, the formation of the dock vision, but as well as the vision, a group of people who owned it because they had been part of kind of creating it. The key factor of the people who gathered around the dock back at the beginning, even when we were literally in single figures, was that they all came from different church traditions here in Belfast, and that in some ways was the very exciting part of it, that this was a unique chance for us to build something together and to brainstorm together and then to actually put it all into action together. And so even when we counted ourselves in single figures, we were Catholic, Protestant, Presbyterian, Anglican, Methodist, all different traditions working together, and that has been the case right until the present day. And so the team that formed, small as it was, there was just a real excitement about working together in a way that our traditional church buildings and structures hadn't really allowed us to up until that point. during 2010, as people were starting to move into the apartment blocks and the college was getting ready to open and the office blocks were starting to fill up, there was still no little community hub. There was nowhere where you could say, meet you after work, or sit down, have a cup of coffee and slouch down and get to know your neighbours. So we ran a thing called Meet the Neighbours. It was an open air deck chair cafe. We just bought some old deck chairs and a kettle, and we set up on the area outside the apartment blocks every Saturday morning and invited all of the new residents, most of whom had never met each other and didn't know who was living next door, to come down and meet their neighbours. And that went really well. That just turned out to be the right idea at the right time. And the development company who own the apartment blocks and also own, there's a series of shop units underneath the apartments, which were all standing empty at that point. And so they gave us the keys that if it rained on a Saturday morning, we were able to actually come in and shelter from the rain. And that kind of developed. They sort of said it was okay for us to leave our deck chairs and our kettles behind from one week to the next. And then we ran a few things, a Christmas party and a few summer barbecues and things. The momentum just kept growing, and then at the start of 2012, it was suggested that we sign, it was quite a new thing at the time, although I think it's become more common now. It's called a meanwhile lease, and it means that you have permission to use a commercial unit free of charge, on the condition that when a commercial tenant comes along offering to pay for it, that you'll get out, and you'll make sure that all of your stuff is pop-up, and that you can move out as quickly as possible. So we signed that lease at the start of 2012, and we opened Dock Cafe in March 2012, just in time for the big Titanic anniversary. We now open 6 days a week. That is, we are here to be a community living room, a place for people to sit and meet their neighbours and catch up with their friends and get to know new people. So we open 11 to 7, Monday to Saturday. It's completely run by volunteers. So your coffee is served not by somebody who's there sort of because they have to, because they're earning a wage, but by somebody who just loves being part of community life. We've tried to dot the place full of conversation starters, so we have lots of old quirky bits of local history and shipyard art and sculpture and all different mad things, just so that it's easy to start conversations, and the place is always just full of the buzz of people meeting. And so the volunteers keep the coffee bar running. The customers don't pay, and there's an honesty box, and so the donations, people pay a donation for their cup of coffee and their scone or whatever they've had, and that covers the cost of actually running the coffee bar, and so the whole thing lurches from one week to the next as just on the fun of being community and forming community in a new space, which only a couple of years ago was just rubble and weeds. Right from the start, we had this vision of this kind of community hub, this community cafe, but always the desire that it somehow represented the faith that had brought us here, and was an expression of church in some shape or form. And so quite early on, we started doing Sunday prayer walks, and those have kind of evolved now into a thing that we call the Dock Walk. We meet every week at 3:33 on a Sunday afternoon for no great spiritual reason, just because 3:33 is easy to remember. And we meet up, we go for a walk, we try to bless what we see out here, because almost every week we see a new path or a new road or a new building or a new bit of work being done, and so we just keep praying blessing over the Titanic quarter as it develops. And then once we get out into the wilds, into the undeveloped area out here, we open up a scripture passage, we play it out through a podcast, and then we chat about it as we walk. We all bring our own different insights and interpretations from our different traditions, and the conversation sometimes is fantastic to hear everybody's different insights. And then once we reach the water's edge down at the far end of the quarter, we play out some worship music through a little speaker. We don't sing. We think that would look a little bit cheesy to stand in the open air and sing along, but we just stand in the beauty of creation, listening to some worship music and praising the Creator.
The scale and size of it all, that that this is just beyond, almost nonsensical in human terms.
The only way that anybody can come into the kingdom and understand the theology.
The distinction between church and chaplaincy is, I guess, a conversation that is still ongoing. I'm not quite sure where we are on that. I'm not sure that this is yet a fresh expression of church, because we don't have that sense of being a gathered church where we have regular members It's very much a thing that's in flux. Even the people who live here, study here, work here, it's mostly short-term contracts, and we have this constant turnover of people, and we're trying to offer a ministry and just a chance for God to do his thing in the middle of all of that. So in some ways, I think it's a lot closer to chaplaincy. In some ways, you could maybe say it's a fresh expression of chaplaincy. It's the idea of taking what would usually happen in a university chaplaincy, where you would have this kind of slightly shabby chic social space where people can call in day or night, and where they know that the God conversations are on the agenda. We're taking that out of a university context or a hospital context, and saying that it might be a valid model of kingdom building for a community, for a place where people live and work and study. And so we have our kind of chaplaincy sofa, I guess, in all these little comfy, shabby corners in Dock Cafe. We have something that looks a little bit like church in the Dock Walks on Sundays, because there is teaching and scripture and fellowship and worship and prayer involved on those walks. And the two sort of play off each other, and the Dock Walk certainly feeds those of us who then provide the chaplaincy experience during the week. But how that grows and develops, I guess I'm still open to seeing how that story grows, because I'm not sure we've come to any conclusions just yet. When we started out, the first bright idea that seemed to be the defining idea of the Dock was that we would buy a boat, and we spent, I'll not say wasted, but spent quite a lot of time in the first year or two boat hunting. We went to see all sorts of different old boats that we thought might have been a suitable space for us to be based upon. And then, with the way things happened, or with the provision of God, I suppose I should say, the boat came along and turned out to be not a boat at all. It turned out to be the use the meanwhile lease on this massive big cafe space, which is double the size, if not more, of any of the boats that we were looking at, and doesn't carry all of those responsibilities to be looking out for leaks and having to scrape barnacles off the hull and all the rest of it. And ironically, in the last couple of weeks, we have now in some ways been offered a boat. There's a ship called the Nomadic, which was actually the tender ship that brought passengers out to the Titanic, and so it's here in the Titanic Quarter now as a tourist attraction, as a way that you can walk in the footsteps of Titanic's passengers. And they came to us a couple of weeks ago and said that they would love to have some sort of Sunday service on board, and could we as the Dock think about what that might look like. And so now the chaplains and the groups and the people that we have involved here in the cafe, we have this great opportunity to brainstorm what it might look like to have worship on the Nomadic, and the church on a boat that we dreamt of at the beginning all of a sudden is almost just falling in our laps, and you just stand back and say, more than I could have asked or imagined. God knows what he's doing.
So what did you all hear from the video? What kind of stood out to you? What was something that maybe was new or you were thinking of?
Just taking that time to listen, just going out and talking to the people, and just crossing the lines with denominations, and just getting to know people, just the basic part. The listening is so incredibly important. If you're doing anything, but if you're doing something like this, just listen to what the need is out there.
Yeah, the key role of listening. Yeah.
I would say the thing that probably stood out to me is, especially, I think maybe a lot of our communities might experience this, is that there seems to be such a pushback to church that, we're anti-church, we're anti-science, anti-asking questions, we're kids playing footballs on Sundays, we don't like that. The old people will say, why do they have to do this on Sundays? But that if we truly walk through the listening, loving, and serving, building community, exploring discipleship, that the community will actually embrace, like the story of the ship coming out and saying, yeah, we want you to come on this journey and have something that they've wanted from the beginning, but that we need to show that we're willing to invest in the community first, before the community will invest back. So that, same with the video we watched before, is that we have to give before we can receive. And I think so much is, right now in the church, it's the opposite. We're looking to receive before we'll give.
Yeah. Such a great point.
I was struck by just how organic everything just grew, and well, what could we do next? Oh, we could do this. Let's see how that goes. And it just, like, just trying things out and seeing how they stuck.
Exactly, yeah. And it's interesting because we talk a little bit about like benchmarks, right? And so the benchmarks will look very different in Fresh Expression than they might a parachute church plan, right? So like a parachute church plan, okay, well 50 people, okay, well that's a benchmark. Now you can actually like rent a space, okay? So NCD will, New Church Development will give you money for whatever. So it's interesting to see the benchmarks. Like the benchmark was, the developer said, well when it rains, come inside, right? Like that was a big benchmark for them. So it's interesting how we kind of identify the benchmarks and the little victories kind of along the way and how those might be very different than they traditionally would. Yeah. What else?
Yeah. One of the things that I have had as a concern thinking about doing this in a very, very rural area was it seems like you have to go where the people are. Well, the people are everywhere in the woods. Like, we don't have a downtown where people walk. He said he spent a year calling people and getting together with them and having coffee. We all have telephones, so I can do that.
There's, we have a minister of outreach and evangelism, and every week I have him report 3 new people he's had coffee with. He has to turn them to me every week.
Different approach depending on the context.
Yeah, yeah, but then the main reason is to do the listening.
Right.
What else? Yeah.
There was an immediate level of trust that was established with the honesty box. And that trust level within relationships proved to be valuable.
Yeah, totally. And for kind of a church or a pastor to immediately trust the community is a big thing, and probably helps with the trust on the other end. Yeah. What else?
One thing I heard, it just takes time. And, it's not something that's going to happen overnight. You have to be in prayer, and you have to, look for the Spirit's leading.
Amen. It takes time, right? It takes time, and I think this is one of the important reasons why possibly longer-term pastor appointments are helpful for churches that really need to do this kind of work, right? Because it does kind of take time for both the pastor and the congregation to trust each other, a community to trust a pastor and a church, and all of those things to happen. So if you would have left Doc Church 3 years in, they might have still been, on the little chairs outside, right? Or back in the chairs outside. So yeah, I think that's a great important point. And I love too is that the whole picture wasn't there for him, right? And actually he said, at first I thought we would just have a boat church, right? And it didn't come till the very end. And it wasn't, he found out about this meanwhile lease. It wasn't like, well, I am going to call people, then I'm going to walk, then we're going to meet outside, then after we meet outside, they're going to give us this space. As Rachel said, it's very organic and comes about in a huge kind of trust in the Spirit. And then also you see, like, with his bishop, right? So after 2 years, at least we don't know the conversations, but there wasn't like a, hey, I forget his name, hey, Kirk, 2 years, but possibly with some of these, I think also in terms of those that have permission-giving abilities to be able to give kind of a longer time than a year, or 2 years, or 3 years, is there a 5 year, or something like that, because I think that's an important piece for Fresh Expressions, is that whole permission-giving. Because for many of us that are pastors, let's face it, we want to continue to have a job, right? And some of that comes from being able to meet the expectations of our superiors, but there must have been a great amount of permission giving to him to be able to continue kind of to do this and to fund it in some ways. So, and maybe, it's just the church is so desperate, it's like, who cares? This is our last straws, we're just throwing them out there.
That was kind of the thing that stuck out to me after about, we started with our inventions and how many just reappointments we're having within the denomination to appoint someone whose pastoral ministry is not preparing a sermon on Sunday morning and consecrating communion and leading a local congregation, but to use a pastor to send them out. Invitation, like he said over years, that his primary job over the course of however long was like on sort of top. I got really, not only are we reimagining what church looks like, but on a denominational level, the system, if you will, I feel like this would also require the church to start reimagining what pastoral ministry might look like, because, I think about how many new appointments we need this year and how short we are for pastors that he's going out. He had someone, whoever his authority figure was, that was willing to send him out to serve coffee at a coffee bar instead of filling a pulpit.
Well, and not even coffee at a coffee bar, just go.
Yeah,
go to the tumbleweeds, go to the rubble, and the tumbleweeds.
Thinking about what they were going to do. It's
right.
Interesting.
Right. And there's kind of, a both and there. There is, some accountability, right? And clearly his was not just by a supervisor, but by a deep desire to bring people into a loving relationship with God. And so, I truly, at times people are like, well, we can't just have a pastor out there drinking coffee. I hear it, is that what Fresh Expressions is? It's like, no, not just, hey, gonna go out there and drink coffee, totally, that's not kind of what this is. And if we know people at their core, they won't be happy just going out there and drinking coffee. What's your purpose, right? At the end of 3 years, if the pastor's just drinking coffee with people, they're probably going to feel a little, but there was, along the way some planning. So we looked at these boats. We spent 2 years looking at boats. That's work, and you're figuring, well, how much does this cost and this and that? And so that's another piece of this video that's very interesting, are kind of the different financial models that work within Fresh Expressions. And so a lot of that is collaboration. We often say desperation breeds collaboration. So at first they thought, let's buy a boat, right? Let's buy a boat. And so it reminds me of one of our Fresh Expressions, kayaking with Jeff. And we were at a Fresh Expressions training, and I kind of took some of the pastors out because it was like a theological training, and they were snoring. So I'm like, let's come out and let me just hear what you're doing, And so Jeff was saying, oh, I'm doing a kayak. I really feel called to do a kayak ministry. I love kayaking. I love being on the water. He's developing kind of a new church out of a larger church, and this can be a key aspect of that. So I said, well, what are some of the first things that Jeff would probably do? And someone said, buy kayaks. And I'm like, gosh, how much would that cost? Right? That's kind of a lot of money, $500 a piece, and then insurance, all of this stuff. You go into it. And so Jeff really heard that, and when he went back, he actually started to partner with a kayaking company that gave him a huge discount, only $10. And then Jeff talked to this church, the kind of inherited church, hey, can you all give me just $500 in a kitty, so if someone can't afford it, I can do their rental. And so there's this incredible synergy happened to where, the first time he launched, he had 25 people there who he had never met before. Because this outfitter put the word out, right? And so really incredible stuff. So he's spending money, right, to kind of birth this new thing. So I think that's part of the skills, these entrepreneurial skills that required. And it's great for the paddleboarding company. He's blessed them. And the paddleboarding company has blessed him. And you're spending very little money. So sometimes we think, oh, we need all this money to start all this new stuff. The only reason they can do coffee for free, because if you know anything about coffee business, very thin margins. You make no money running a coffee shop. And the only reason they were able to keep going is the meanwhile lease. And I'm thinking, does he get first right of refusal? Does, if a new person comes in, all this stuff. So anyways, it's very interesting to think about all the different financial ways that could really help birth. And doing that actually blesses us, right? So it's really important. We're in WeWork right now, and we do these PB&J parties. And so we've helped WeWork kind of obtain their mission and being in service to the community. So part of the WeWorks around the world, part of their goal is being hyper so they have to find some kind of service that they can do. So what are things? Can we do these peanut butter and jelly parties? Sure, great, yeah. So we get our peanut butter and jelly made for the homeless. They get to be a part of the mission, right? And get other people to be a part of the mission. And so that collaboration is key. So when they had their Southeast WeWork employee retreat in Miami, and they had to share a member story, guess whose member story they shared? Our churches. So we got to go and make 500 PB&J parties with 70 of their employees and say, we are a church, and we believe in the power of we. And we believe that it's actually God that empowers all of us to be together. And to have them all say, like, awesome, and not throw tomatoes at us, right? And so part of it's like you're saying, like, actually, not everyone might hate us, right? There might be some openness. And part of that is trusting in the Holy Spirit to open those doors where we are. So, yeah. Okay, so listening to God, right? Part of it's listening to God. Part of it's listening to those whom we are called to. We talked a little earlier about different businesses that are doing different things, and one of my church members just retired as the Broward County attorney and is now working for another firm in Miami and really wants to start attainable condo housing. And so in my church, we've been working with a bunch of developers, and so she says, can you invite me to meet with all these developers? Can we set up meetings? I'm like, sure. So we're going to meet with all these folks, and she and I are kind of working towards this attainable housing thing. So it's not just rentals, like affordable housing for rentals, but actually how do we get folks owning their own condo? And so anyways, she said, I did all kinds of research on this young developer. And you know what they do? You know what they do to make decisions for their company? I'm like, what do they do, Jody? They get all their friends together and have a lot of drinks. And that's how they decide kind of what they're going to do in their new building and what the rooms are going to look like and how much they're going to price them for. She's like, they listen to the people around them, right? That's how they do it. And so this listening piece is very key for us, isn't it? So this whole company that makes millions a year, that's how they decide how they move forward, is by listening. And then we have loving and serving. So think service, not a service, right? So if you did coffee and handing out coffee, providing a space, this was a service, not a service, but this was serving the community, providing a space for communal gathering, where there was a lab. And so service follows listening, but then listening, continues throughout the whole process. And then building community. So we know that repeated action builds relationships. And we know this just through our church work, right? Confirmation class. Some of you might have confirmation classes that are full of kids who've never gone to your church before, right? Their parents just want them confirmed sometimes. But by the end of that 12-week period, they're all best friends, right? Because for 12 weeks, they've met at the same time. We know that community takes time, and we continue to listen and love and serve. Exploring discipleship. We learn best by doing. And we see that in Scripture, discipleship is always relational, right? We can name some of the folks from the Scriptures. Paul, right? He mentored others and was also brought to the faith through a radical experience with the Holy Spirit. But there was also someone who went to him, right? And we know that in Fresh Expressions, we often hear discipleship is a lot slower than I realized. And in Florida specifically, we have had this is really where we need to provide the most resources. Now in England, one interesting thing is that before kind of Fresh Expressions, there was Alpha, there was Messy Church, all of these things that happened kind of before Fresh Expressions. And so what happened, like we saw in that Wesley Playhouse story, is that then that became the means by which they offer discipleship. So they really had kind of a model for that once they kind of created this community. But we continually, I'm trying to work with our conference staff about really identifying discipleship resources and materials for open D church, closed D church, open M church, closed, just because I think that would be helpful. And we realize that we all start at a different place, right? And in a lot of Fresh Expressions, you might not have all open D church, right? You might have a little bit of both, so it's not like you can be running 4 different programs at the same time, right? But it's a little bit additional. So, and then discipleship is contextual. So one thing that we've done kind of in an off-spin of Yoga Chapel is we have done kind of classes surrounding a certain thing that people are interested in. So we have New World School of the Arts, which is right near our church, and a lot of the folks that come to Yoga Chapel are from New World School of the Arts. And so they really want to know about faith and sexuality. A lot of my friends from school are gay. I grew up Catholic. What does this all mean? And so to kind of get to faith and sexuality, you have to do like God, Jesus Christ, Holy Spirit, like creation, kind of understanding it all even to get there. So it gives us kind of this great tie-in to work around. So then it's like, okay, we're going to have an 8-week series Bible study on this, right? Or death and dying. I don't understand why this person died. God had a plan for this, whatever it may be. So that's really helped us where we start with the questions that they have and really work to find resources around that. And then church taking shape, gathering occurs in some sort of rhythm. Members participate, get together, and do things that foster their spiritual growth. And then do it again. Continue listening, loving, serving, building community, then pass it on. One great way that I saw this was a church in Pahokee, Florida. And this church, the pastor got there, and it's kind of an immigrant community, and she thought she would do an after-school program. She came to meet with me in my old church and said, how did you do this after-school program with your church? This is what we're going to do for migrant children. And so she went back, and then they had a community meeting one night at this place called Miracle Village. And someone said, you have to go, pastor. All the local pastors go, you have to go. She said, I really don't think of this meeting. She goes to the meeting. It happens that Miracle Village is actually a sex offender village. That if you are a sex offender, you can live there. And so they have a yearly service. And so while she was there, she had, previous to this, had been praying for a contemporary worship leader. And so she shows up and leading worship is this young man playing the piano. And she said, I heard from God, this is your worship leader. Here he is. So she said, well, after the service, I went, you're my worship leader. I said, what are you talking about? So she explained everything and said, it's great, but I'm a sex offender. Yeah. She's like, no problem. I don't care. God told me that you need to be my worship leader. And so she started kind of this new service. And specifically it was for sex offenders. And because it was at night, so she had to follow all these rules, right? And it grew to 80 folks from around that community, not just sex offenders, but their wives, or their children, or whoever it might be in the area. It was a safe space for them to come into church. And some people from the institutional church were like, oh, they're singing better music. I like their music, so I'm going to go to that service, even though it's sex offenders, right? So this one girl goes over, and her mother is the organist of the 11 o'clock service. And her mother finds out that these folks are sex offenders and that her daughter has some of their numbers in her phone. She goes into the office and says, I've called the bishop. You're moving. You're not going to do this in my church. And because it all kind of grew and happened very fast. And little by little, the pastor said, no, I'm doing this. The DS says it's okay. The bishop says it's okay. We're following this policy. We have a covenant with all these people. We're going ahead. Sorry, Linda. You know? And so what, I guess it was Ash Wednesday. The pastor said, our Ash Wednesday service is going to be led by the Power of Second Chance. That was what the church was called. And so this woman, and if anyone has a problem, let me know. We can create another service for you, but this is kind of what we're going to do. And so this woman thought, well, I'm just not going to go. And so, but the day of, she said, I always go to Ash Wednesday. Like, I always do this. This is very important. It's one of my favorite holidays. You know, I'm just going to go, but I'm going to be mad the whole time. So she goes, Matt the whole time. The service ends. Patty was very smart to do this. Ash Wednesday people leave in silence, right? And so she leaves in silence, and Patty turns to Chad and others. We made it. No pitchforks, right? And but then Linda comes back in. She's like, oh, dang it. And Linda says, hey, you four, you have good voices. Choir practice is in 10 minutes, and there's going to be a folder on each chair, and you better be there. So later we found out that during the service, she had a Holy Spirit moment where her heart was strangely warmed, and she understood that these folks are children of God, and this is their church. So it's this incredible story kind of about this bridge too, because then these four start singing in the 11 o'clock service, the traditional service. And in Pahokee, a lot of people, like we said, they inherit a church, the kids leave. They don't have kids. So these young men, 30 to 55, now they all adopt, all these folks, 80 and older, are adopting these guys. They're all going home after church with them, right? So it's this incredible story. And so what's interesting is kind of this whole church really rallied behind the service. And now, of course, it's their biggest service. And they thought, once, because I kind of took them on the road, Patty, Chad, and Linda. And Linda's like, why do you want me to come on? I'm like, you're the most important part. You're the one we have in every church that's so resistant, And so, but once they started to learn more and more about Christian expressions, they're like, we really need to take this to new people, not just the people we meet. So they started a service then at a dock bar. And so now they have 30 or 40 people there at that dock bar. And so some of them are from Power of a Second Chance, and then so they're doing it again. They're saying, okay, we've reached all these folks, and even some of the folks that are in it, we've been reached. Now we need to go and reach someone else. And so they plant kind of a new church in a new place. So in Christian expressions, we realize that everyone has different gifts, right? And so we have apostles, prophets, evangelists, shepherds, teacher, and it's important to kind of understand who we are, right? And maybe identify as we're forming a Fresh Expressions team, do we have a teacher on our team? Do we have a shepherd that's part of our group? Do we have an evangelist? Do we have a prophet? Do we have an apostle? So you can remember that, right? And so one of the things we really work to achieve, especially if you have a church that really wants to be part of something, is do we have all of these folks? Or who can we ask? Hey, this is a great club. Hey, I really need a teacher. Bob, I know you've been teaching Disciple 1 through 80 for 80 years here. And everyone has done 1 through 80. But I really need your gifts with this new Fresh Expressions I'm starting. Would you be willing to come along and be part of my team, right? So it's also kind of an excuse. Hey, to start this Fresh Expression, I really need these 5 people. So would you be willing to come and be part of this team? And so within a Fresh Expression, oftentimes Bishop Carter and I wrote a little book together, which is really like a Bible study. So there are 6 parts you can do, very simple. We did it. I did it for a class that I did at Wesley. He had written some blogs, and I had written some Bible studies that went with the blog. He's like, oh, we should make this a book. And, but really what I wanted to do is provide a conversation point, because I really think that change starts through conversation, right? You can't just pop up in your church on Sunday and say, we're starting Fresh Expressions. People are like, what? Why? Right? Why do we need it? What is it? Who is it for? Is it not for me? I'm not in it, right? And so really this book is something you could use with that group. So this book really is for kind of that church and creating the culture of Fresh Expressions. And I learned the great power of it when I did it with a Sunday school at my own church, the Inspiration class. And so they actually invited me. They said, well, Pastor, you wrote this book, so can you come teach it for us? I'm like, sure. So, but it was so wonderful for them to go through it. And a lot of healing happened when they realized they weren't the only church that had declined in numbers over the past 12 years. and really kind of dug down deep to why, and not blaming or shaming, right? And then also kind of looked towards new models. And so those folks would probably be some of the permission givers. The ones that if they truly understand it, they will vote to turn their Sunday school classroom into a kids' gym, you know? And so in Fresh Expressions, we understand that we need all of those folks, right? We need the permission givers to approve as part of the budget $500 for the people for the kayaks, right? That's part of that piece. We need the supporters. So one woman, Wilma, Pastor, I will never be a part of Fresh Expression. I don't understand it, but I will pray every day for this yoga chapel. And if you give me the names of the people, I'll pray for them. And if you come and tell me what they want prayer for, I'll pray for them every day. We need her, right? We need that supporter. And then we have the pioneer, which is possibly a church member. I mean, possibly the pastor plays these roles from time to time, plays the role of the permission giver. There's a woman in my church just recently, and I kind of caught myself because she was like, I want to do women's faith fitness on Saturday mornings. We're just going to start with the second Saturday of the month. I have an instructor, and as long as we advertise him in our weekly e-newsletter, he'll do it for us for $20. And I'm like, whoa, we need a strategy. We need to meet 4 times. And I was like, shut up. And she came to me on Sunday. She's like, so what's going on with this? She's like, I'm just doing it. I just don't care. And I'm just going to send you the bill, and you're going to find it in the budget for this $20. And I'm like, okay, go girl, go do it, you know. But sometimes even as the pastor, we're the one that's giving the permission. Go do it, go try it, okay. We might waste $100 on you trying this, but at least we tried something, right? And here's a person who wants to give her time and feels like this is important. So our last little section is really kind of in terms of creating a culture of fresh expressions. And this I kind of added on, and I do this little session from time to time because what I found is most of the reality of many of us pastors is working in these two worlds, right? And we can't blow up the dock. So how do we bring people around to understand at the top of the mountain, right? Or maybe while we're going down the mountain, that something needs to change. So let's take just like a 2-minute break, because I need to use the restroom. And then we'll like go in strong for this last 45 minutes. Sound good? Okay, so just like 2 minutes.
That's bad hospitality. Because we have a lot of lazy people. What am I not doing?
I don't know what's wrong. There was no return address, nothing. No.
That's a fresh expression.
No. I have no idea. I don't even know what I did.
It's in your box. No, it's in his memory box.
No, I think it's in my correspondence in my desk drawer.
You'll find out when you pack the drawer.
I keep every card that I get from the church person. Unless it's negative, then I get rid of it.
Like during Christmas, for instance, if it just says love.
Oh no, not Christmas cards. Just like ones that just pop up out of nowhere.
Like the miscellaneous.
Do you have any idea how many, Allison? You don't have any idea since it's 2 hours together?
60. Could I ask each month how many
Do we get any kind of your?
This is a product that we're going to
Yes, some people do, some people don't. Yeah, so.
She got two.
Next time we encourage people to, save and
if I would have been alive in
especially Altoona.
and I would have cried.
There are certain percentage of members
One day you just jumped into heart surgery.
That's so bad. You have been to the body.
No.
Yeah.
Oh, you should go.
Do I look like I will for
And not everybody will go up to Scranton Wilkesboro either.
Well, no, I just probably wouldn't have to either. Oh, they're coming to Greenwood next week. Oh, the 23rd.
Yes.
That'll come to Greenwood.
Yeah, but can you feed 60 people in your kitchen?
Yeah, absolutely.
But on the other hand, we've had a church that hasn't had a fellowship hall or a big enough space. Arrangements with a neighboring church or fire hall, something like that, community partner that community space.
I know, just trying to collect.
Yeah, why would you go to that?
So many of you are going to a new church, which is exciting. But one of the things, there's a book called Take the Next Step, or like the Next Faithful Step, I forget what it's called, by Lovett Weeds, who's a professor at Wesley. And one of the key phrases that stuck out for me was that we really should provide a prophetic description before prescription. So it's easy for us as pastors to kind of come into a church, or even as lay people to sit back and say, well, this is just what needs to happen, right? This is what they need to do. This is the prescription. Do this, this, and this, and everything will change, right? And, but before that, he argues that you need kind of a description. And part of that is really getting at the root and discovering realities and myths about the church. So, what are some of your church's realities? We named some of those before, and the who, what, when, where, why, right? The reality is we're stuck to our building. The reality is we have no children under 10. The reality is we haven't baptized the baby in 5 years. The reality is we haven't had a new profession of faith. The reality is we have a very strong the reality is, whatever it is, we have great traditional music. And then what are some of the myths surrounding the realities? So when I heard when I got to my church in downtown Miami, so one reality is we have no children. And what was the myth that surrounded that reality? Because a lot of these realities we have, but we always want to kind of justify why we have them. Right? So the myth that surrounded the reality that we have no children was, there are no children that live in downtown Miami, Pastor. It's downtown. People don't raise their kids downtown. There are no kids that live in Brickell, right next to us, right? Lovett describes it as myths are tempting assumptions about congregational life. Just as cheese lures a mouse, myths lure us to believe what we want to be true, right? What we want to be true. Myths allow us to avoid change, right? Myths permit us to use the same old methods to get the same old results. Myths mobilize and trap us in dead ends, blocking us from fully living out the answer to our most important question: what is God calling us to be and to do as a congregation? So this is really kind of key for me. And it was interesting because I came to the church and no kids in downtown or people are raising kids. Well, then you have, we have this great resource in the Florida Conference, and I think you probably have it here. It's available in some way called Mission Insight. And it gives the demographics, right? So guess what one of the two fastest growing age groups are for downtown Brooklyn? Children 0 to 18. Right? 0 to 18. So part of it is this prophetic description. Like, actually, there are kids here. The first day I worked, I walked to work from my house. And then the next day I rode my bike and I passed tons of children. So I knew this couldn't be true, right? It was a myth. Because if there are children around us, then we have to do something, right? We have to dedicate money to it. We don't have the money. Or whatever it may be, right?
Time. We have to donate
time, right? So things need to change. What is one indicator of your church's changed temperature? So what's one indicator of your church's changed temperature? What is something that has changed in your church in the last year? 5 years or 10 years?
Pastor.
The pastor. There you go. Maybe the church put TVs in the sanctuary. That's an indicator of change, right? When I got to my church in downtown Miami, they had no electronic stuff in the sanctuary except a microphone. Right?
And that didn't work.
Yeah. That didn't work. So like, check, halfway through the service. Yeah. And then what might be one indicator of your church's changed temperature? So for us, it was the vote to put TVs in the sanctuary. Okay, this church might be willing to change a little bit, right? And change to meet the needs of someone else other than themselves, right? Well, I only want the words up there if you also put the music, because I like to sing alto, Pastor.
And I can't sing without the notes of
Yeah, exactly. What indicators tell your church's story? So next is data. And for me, really, statistics tell a story. Data really can tell a story. And so some of the data that's been helpful to kind of move churches in a new direction is the following. Now, why is this important? You could say, oh, my members are where? Well, we're dying, right? And so when I got to my church or when others, oh yeah, Pastor, we're dying. Oh yeah, we're old. Yeah, we'll probably put this church, we'll probably have to sell the building in 2 years. We know that. Yeah, we know that, Or some might not say it at all. Some might just totally be, something will happen. God will provide. A woman said to me, Pastor, every time we're in a crunch, someone dies and they leave just the right amount of money to the church.
Wow.
And this is how we're going to keep going. Okay, well, here's the list of everyone over 70. And you want to go and interview each of them. So maybe ask them if their parents have had cancer or congestive heart failure, and then we can give it to an actuary and they can really measure that out, and then ask them how much they're planning to give to the church. Have them sign this document, and then we can really do some strategic planning around, death. That'd be great. Right? So we did some other research. Yeah. What percent of the top 50 givers are over 65? And so for us, this was 81%. 81% of our top 50 givers were over the age of 65. And so really kind of what this meant for us was that once I kind of crunched all the numbers and averaged out kind of what people were giving just on the mortality rate, not based on the specifics of people in our church, but the U.S. census mortality rate, we would have to reduce our budget by at least $14,000 a year. And that was not dependent on moving, which people move in and out of Miami a lot. So people in our church who are just near retirement, most of the time will retire from their big job in Miami and they'll move. They'll move to Fort Pierce, they'll move to Ocala, to Leesburg. So this was just mortality rate, not people planning to move once they retire and take their tithe with them to FUMC or Fort Pierce. And then the percentage of weekly worship attendance, over 65. And so for us, this was 71%. And then the last was the percentage of your budget that involves building maintenance. Is this larger than your programming and personnel budget? So we found that actually over 60%, or the exact number of our budget was going towards building maintenance. And our building was actually, so we rented our parking lot out, we rented our classrooms out to Miami-Dade College, and even so, the building was still running at a deficit. So the building was still, after renting, after making tons of money off of our building, we still weren't making that. And the interesting thing about this is the whole issue of control, right? As a church, we want to control our building. And so as we began to talk about the possibilities of selling or leveraging that asset, people really said, well, we won't have control. And I thought, well, we really don't have control right now because we rent out our parking lot. So this means that when Shakira comes to sing, we can't have a church finance meeting, right? Because we won't have anywhere to park because parking attendant gets it first, right? This means that if we want to do VBS, we can't because Miami-Dade College rents all of our rooms. So actually this building is controlling us. We're not controlling it at this point, right? So it's interesting to see kind of in terms of our buildings, we often think we're controlling them, but in so many ways they're controlling us, both financially and then also at times missionally if we're renting out a huge part of our buildings for whatever it may be. So what data describes your church's current state? So possibly you can take some of these and take back to your church. I can send you some formulas that I use with mortality rate. But it was interesting to see folks' reaction to this. Because like I said, many people said, oh, we're done. You know, oh, this, oh, that. But it doesn't become real until you crunch the numbers. You actually give them the actual numbers. Then it's not just a flighty statement. Oh, we're dying, church, we have to change, right? So when I told them we would have to reduce our budget by $14,000 a year, every year, I said, and so these are some of our options as we move forward. So next year, we're going to have to reduce by $14,000. So what are we going to cut? Possibly the only thing that we can cut is the little programming budget that we have. Right? And then the next year, we'll probably have to reduce my salary or possibly reduce our music staff. So we've got to get rid of our soloist and we just pay someone to play piano. And we'll probably have to get rid of our music director because of that, because we pay them a lot. Sometimes they work it. And then after that, we're going to have to reduce my salary again. So I'm going to have to be at 2 churches. So I'm going to be your pastor and another church's pastor. And that was the shock to the heart, right? Because we're First United Methodist Church. We've never been a part of a 2-point charge, right? And so actually mapping it out for the folks is helpful, right? Because then they actually see these are our options. So it's not just, oh, we're going to die. When someone dies, it's not like a doctor just comes to you and says, oh, you're going to die, right? That would be unprofessional. The doctor comes to you and says, you have some options. You can do chemo treatment, you can do this radiation, you can have surgery, right? There are many ways that you can die, right? The same with churches. There are many ways you can die as a church. You can pull the plug and move out, right? You can do whatever. There are many ways. And so I think talking with the church about kind of the options, about what it says, is really helpful. So what does this data reveal about our church? What does it reveal about ourselves? So for us, we came to the place where we said, actually, we care more about our property than we do people. And so you might have, Jim Wallace does Sojourners, and he wrote a book like Rediscovering, or it's The Church About Church Finances or something. Or Moral Compass, something moral, and he talks about there about how the church's budget is a moral document, right? Just like ours is. So does anyone here use the app Mint? It's like a personal finance app. And so it's this great thing, and you put in a budget like, $10 for fast food a month, right? Or $20 for clothing, or, $600 for car expense. And so what it does is every day, like, it'll ping you if you spend more. And then, like, at the end of, the month or whatever, you can always go in and see where your spending is, right? So one way I cut down on, like, the 2 times a week fast food is when I looked at it, and all of a sudden, like, the fast food is, like, huge, right? And I'm like, when I looked at that data, I thought, I am a fast food eater, right? Like, but it wasn't until I looked at that and said, wow, I'm spending more on food than I really should be, right? Than I am my car or something. And so it revealed that to me. So for us, the data revealed that we cared more about property than we did people. We cared more about our property than we did the people around us, because that's where the majority of our funding was going. Another piece of data that I did is I looked at how many hours a week we were using the church property for the church work. Other than the office building, it was only 17 hours a week. Only 17 hours a week, and the large majority of that was our homeless ministry, which is great. Is it discipling people? Not really, right? So we have to ask, what does it reveal about ourselves? What does it reveal about our churches? And what does it reveal about what we value? And so for us, we realized that very soon we would be a part of what Dr. Lovett Weems calls the tsunami effect, right? Where kind of over 10 years, the majority of Methodist churches will die. And so we could kind of choose our day. And this was somewhat hard for us. And we had to figure out what we would do. And I think for a lot of churches, kind of this kind of information is important, right? And as the pastors or even leaders within the church, it's important for us to go over these things with the church, right? Just like in a family, we hopefully would go, husband and wife, we would go over a budget together and say, this is kind of what's happening. And in the same way, providing this for the church and really putting it into the members to say, what are we going to do about this? What are we going to do about this? And so, there are many different things, and I would encourage many folks to include this conversation into a long-range planning team, short-range planning team, whatever it may be. And part of that planning is the work of Fresh Expressions, right? So we have 2 buildings. We're going to use one for a playground center. Who knows if that will work in your community, but I'm just saying, okay? Probably not right now. But if we reveal the data, what could happen, right? If we kind of let people to take seriously this work of the church, what would happen? Because if we don't require that of people, they won't do it. That's why we're the pastor, right? We're the ones that are like pastors because we kind of think this is serious work. Like we think the work of spirituality and faith is central to who we are as humans, right? So if we don't take it seriously, they're not going to take it seriously. If we don't ask them to work, they're not going to work, right? And so part of the work is this work of reflecting on who are we, right? What is our data? What does it say about us? What are we going to do in the future, right? Just like a family in my church, they, have a vacation home. The husband lost the job, right? What are we going to do? Are we going to sell the vacation home where we only go once a month, once every other month, And so for us, that was really kind of what we had to talk about at First Miami. Were we going to sell our weekly vacation home, our weekly worship home? Because that's really all it was, right? A place where we came kind of once a week to do an hour of worship, an hour of study. So this is the church I'm at, and as you can see, we have waterfront views, right? So there's the American Airlines Arena, our church, and very soon when I got there, developers came and said, we'll give you $20 million today for your church. And I said, wow.
Where do I sign?
I can't say yes, but I can't say no, right? And so it gave me this great opportunity to go and to say, can we form an exploratory redevelopment committee, right? Exploratory is a great word, right? Can we form an exploratory fresh expressions committee, right? We're just going to explore this option. And so all of kind of the data and the permission to ask for exploratory all happened at the same meeting, right? Is you bring people to a real low, and then you say, but there's a possibility of life up here, right? But there's a possibility of life right here. So could we just explore what these options are going to be for our property, right? Let's see, let's just kind of, and these are the people, of course I already had named, these are the people who I want to be on our exploratory development committee. Will you approve? Those people were people from the church and some weren't from the church. And so this is actually desperation breeds collaboration. So people are to a desperate point, right? And they know they're at a desperate point. And they know that they have to collaborate with someone else to meet their missional needs, right? And this happens in our own lives as well. And this is really kind of how WeWork office space really came about. That people need office space. They can't do it alone. So let's do it together. This is also really a way that often future generations are thinking. We have to do it together. What are some other things that newer generations have created that make you do something together at a lower price? You see it in all big cities. Uber, right? Airbnb, right? These are all ways that millennial generations have moved forward to do things cheaper and together, right? And why do they do this? Are they just kind of like virtual, virtuous gods, right? No. Because statistics show that millennials won't make ever as much as their parents did. They have to learn how to live differently. On a lower budget, but many of them want a lot of the nice things that they had, right? So I'll forfeit square footage for a vacation every year, right? Or I'll forfeit owning my own car so I can have this experience, right? And so really, and that's not everybody, but it is the majority. And in the same way, I think it's a lesson for the church, right? In many ways, we need to learn how do we do things together with other denominations. Like you said, right? We no longer have the luxury to say, I am very different than the Anglicans, right? Because the outside people, they don't know. They don't care, right? It just causes more confusion. So this idea of collaboration is huge in terms of fresh expressions and how the church will survive. And so for us, part of what this meant was putting together a process. So as we work towards bringing a church, changing the culture, someone said earlier, really, it's a cultural change. It's the change of the mindset of the church from what can you give me to what can I give you? How can we work together? Not how can I do it all on my own, but how can we work together? So part of it is putting together a process, telling the story through data and facts. Looking back and forward with the data. So this is what the data has told us. This is what the data will be. We'll reduce the budget by this much every year. What do we want to reduce? And then begin a process of self-exploration, needs, and goals. Maybe working through existing committees, if you have those, or through one committee, or through an external exploratory committee. And then begin a process as well of community exploration needs and goals, like the mission insight data we talked about before. I know the first few years the conference made us print that out and identify what 3 colors we were. I had to do this for the church profile. And I'll admit, like, I printed it out and didn't even think about it. I was just like, urban jet setter, and, went through it, didn't think about it. It wasn't until this process that I actually, printed out the 24-page report for all leaders, for all the church council members, and we went through it, and we invited Dan from New Church Development to come down and look at it with us. And then I printed out all the other ones, right? It wasn't until we went through this process that I actually took it seriously and found how much help it was, right? To really change. Well, now you might be thinking, what does this have to do with fresh expressions? But to really mobilize, not to just do it on your own, but to mobilize a church to say, Pastor, it's okay that you do a fresh expression. It's okay, Pastor, that you spend 10 hours a week kayaking on the river, right? They're not just going to let you do that. All these conversations are very important beforehand. And so, beginning a process of community exploration, needs, and goals. And then telling the story through data and facts. So telling the story of the church. Telling it to itself. And I think for us, one interesting thing is not only kind of the data and facts, but the history of the church. For our church at First Miami, when I looked back at the history, what I found is that it was our church who started the retirement home in Miami. It was our church who started 10 churches in Miami, planted 10 churches. People that lived in that community said, I'm going to start a church there. And they started it in their home. And they built the church. And then I learned that, kind of right when we get there, but also throughout the whole time, that a lot of the first people who came to Miami, other than the Native Americans, of course, they all thought that they were first in Miami. I'm like, no. Miami's actually a Native American name. It means sweet water. We kind of forget them. But some of the pioneers were members of our church. And so those were people who, like, we found out that Dr. Hudson, his grandfather was Dr. Jackson, the first doctor in Miami. And Flagler, who built the railroad, invited him to come down, and he had to ride his horse to Fort Lauderdale, then got on a boat from Fort Lauderdale to Miami. And he got out and walked around, and the streets were made of wood planks, and it was muddy, and he slipped and fell, and went back to the boat dock and swore he would never come back again, but the boat left, and it wouldn't be back for 2 more weeks. And so he stayed in Miami. And then eventually Flagler, coaxed him to be there, right? But this was great history for me to know, to say, church, guess what? You started with pioneers, right? You actually started with people who first came here. They saw nothing. They didn't even see a city. But they said, we're going to do this, which is helpful when we want to do something new, right? Because all these stories say you don't know what the final thing is going to look like. So at every church, it started somewhere. So we can all use that story. This church started with pioneers, people who didn't see a building, right? And we don't know what the future is too, but we're going to go out and rest just like they did. So pulling stories from the past and making them relevant to the future is very helpful. And then begin a process of self-exploration, needs, and goals. And take some time defining preferences versus purpose. So my preference might be to always have pews, but in order for the purpose of our church to happen, we need to move to chairs so that our middle school tutoring program can happen in the sanctuary, right? So defining preferences versus our purpose, and really defining those for a congregation. What is my preference? And being real about those. My preference as a pastor is to have a sauna in my office, right? That would be my preference. But how does that align with the purpose of the church? I'm not so sure. Begin a process of community exploration, needs, and goals. Going out to the community, figuring out what are their needs and goals. And then work with both explorations to find the intersections. And then possibly work with fresh expressions materials and reflect with that group about some possibilities. And then this is really kind of key, creating a process with dates, expectations, and deadlines with an openness to the movement of the Spirit. If we are real with ourselves, we will just become little maintenance robots, right? We gotta get the bulletin. All this takes a lot of time, right? We will set no time aside for new things. It will be bulletins written, sermon needs to be done, right? And so working with a team of people helps hold us accountable, and setting dates and deadlines is also very helpful to actually make sure that the new work gets done, right? Because at this point in time, I believe that pastors have to work harder in many ways than we ever had before. Like, we don't have the full-time AA. How many of you here have a full-time AA, administrative assistant? If you do have a full-time A, are they a full-time A who only has worked in a church and knows the church like the back of their hand, doesn't ask you about a form, does it all themselves, knows where to find it? They don't exist anymore, right? And so we're doing all of that work, right? And our congregations are aging, which means that there's a lot more work, a lot more hospital visits all at the same time. There's not diversity. We don't have a visitation pastor, most of us. We don't have, trained committees to go do these things. And so for many of us, we could just keep on doing the maintenance and being the chaplain to the church. So setting aside a process with dates, expectations, and deadlines is really important in terms of kind of changing the culture. So church, we know this is happening. Here is this opportunity for us. What are we going to do? How are we going to do it? When are we going to do it? And then working with a coach or a friend. I mean, this could even be a ministry partner. I know that's how it works with many of my friends. Hey, how is that new thing going? Right? Have you done this? What's happening here? And so this was really kind of the story of the church in downtown Miami, which we basically decided to sell the property and move out of the property. And currently we have our services in Greater Bethel AME Church, which is 3 streets away and 5 streets back. So at the beginning of Overtown. And that's where we have now our mobile shower unit for the homeless. And realizing that, our homeless ministry probably wouldn't be able to be right by the water because a lot of homeless are moving west. So how do we continue to serve the homeless? We go mobile, right? We go to where they are. And then our offices are in WeWork, so we can be around a bunch of different people and a bunch of different organizations and find partners for the homeless ministry and start a service there as well. So it's been a pretty crazy process to take a First United Methodist Church out of its building, right? And then say, actually, we're still a church. And after the first Sunday at Greater Bethel AME, people realized a few things. One, they're only in worship an hour a week. And that was really big for a lot of people. We actually only come here, most of us, an hour a week. And that kind of totally changed their thought about what church is, right? And at the same time, we launched small groups. We have small groups that meet in homes now. And all of this really changed kind of what we believed about church and what we can achieve, and kind of the greater goal of we'll be able to be a church because we let go of this one big thing. We're able now to be a church continuously into the future. And so it's hard work with the letting go and the new thing. It's different wherever we are. It just depends on the context. Not everyone's on the bay, right? Not everyone can totally sell their property for a lot of money and do things. But we do have space that can be transformed, like the little nursery, right? We do have spaces in our community that can be utilized and occupied by the church. So there are many, many ways to do this, but I really think part of the first beginning goal to do it successfully is really to begin to create a culture of fresh expressions in your church. And then from there, working with teams to make these things happen. So that's the end of really the formal presentation. I think we have about 10 minutes for questions and answers. And then as Anna said, there's a little thing that's going around. And so if you just want a conversation partner, throughout annual conference, you can definitely meet and we'll just, swap, war stories.
We have the evaluation too.
Oh, and the evaluation we need to fill out. Yes. So, and apparently, and there's also certificates. I think those are different for lay and clergy.
And actually, the clergy ones.
Oh, okay.
They were 2 point, and you get 4 point for this one. So, just write your name on a piece of paper right here, and I will email you one. The ones I found upstairs were the ones for the conference session, and you get 4. So just sign your name and your email on this tablet that's coming around. If you're clergy, if you're lay, there's a certificate for you. So this tablet. Yes, please.
Okay, so as we pass around the congregations. Is there anyone that has any questions, thoughts?
I do have a question.
Yeah.
Appreciate your experience. What's your response when someone says, Audrey, I have a great idea for you, fresh expressions. And what's your response to that? Encourage them to put them to be like, oh, it's their idea, and pass on them to me, not to pawn off on me.
Yeah, so that hasn't happened to me in a while because people know how busy I am at this point. But like this woman who's doing this ladies' fitness, you know, I told her from the beginning, I really can't be there all the time, you know. And just the other week, she's like, I hope you'll be there. I'm like, I really can't be there all the time for this, right? But I do think kind of that relational mentor piece is helpful. And I think just being honest, saying, I actually can't run this one, but I'm willing to walk with it through you, throughout the whole way. And maybe can you explore how God might want you to do this? Like, why can't you do this? Why in your mind are you thinking, I can't do this? Maybe it's because they don't have a pastor or don't work for a church or are afraid of whatever it may be. And maybe there's someone else in the congregation that would run it with them. Maybe they just see themselves as a supporter. And so I can bake the cookies for, you know, the gastro church every week. But I don't know how to start that. But I know a lot of people love, you know, a lot of people are foodies. They'll gather around the table every week, and it's, you know. So maybe it's also kind of working to connect different people in your church that have those gifts. And always for me, I'm like, well, why don't you read this book and start a period of discernment and prayer? So come back to me in 6 weeks after you've prayed about this for 6 weeks and read this material, and then let's talk from there. Because then you really can see, are people actually in it or not? Is this going to be a waste of my time or isn't it? Because if they're not kind of passionate enough to pray about it, or to, you know, then that might tell us something. Any other thoughts or questions or answers? We'll go ahead and close in prayer, and then you guys can keep us you're ready. Great. God, we thank you for this time of learning, for this time of sharing, of remembering that we don't do this work alone. God, we pray that we might find strength through your Holy Spirit, that we wouldn't be discouraged, but rather take on the courage that you provide to each and every one of us to lead our congregations into a variety of different futures. Lord, we pray that we would hold on and trust each other here in this room and our colleagues, and as we do kind of this scary work. But Lord, we know it is your work, and it's the work of bringing all people to proclaim you as their Lord. So God, we give you thanks for it. We just pray for continued guidance and strength. It's in your name. Amen. Okay, have a great day, everyone.